Welcome to the Blue Security Podcast, a weekly podcast for information security defenders, where we bring you discussions on best practices, tools, and implementation for enterprise security. Now, here are your hosts for today's show, Andy Jha and Adam Brewer.
Welcome to this week's episode of the Blue Security Podcast. I'm Andy, your host.
I'm Adam, your co-host.
This week, we're going to talk about something called operational excellence. And that was a term that was coined by a tweet that both Adam and I saw through Swift on Security, who is a very prominent Twitter and Mastodon user. He has a lot of followers, and he's very well known for his opinions on security and his configurations. So the tweet that we saw, and I'll read some of the tweet as well as the replies verbatim so that we can discuss and talk about this. So he said, if your company uses Office 365, your most important ransomware insurance is getting your user files on OneDrive, and it can transparently back up desktop and documents. Now, users don't need to put stuff in OneDrive manually. You can manage the setting with group policy. Enterprise security is operational excellence. If you can't even recover from non-malicious stuff like SSD crashes, you absolutely, positively are going to get wrecked by ransomware, and you're wasting IT staff on routine garbage instead of actual resilience engineering. If you can't rebuild a machine in 40 minutes with data migration, you're going to be in a world of hurt either by hackers or an IT screw up. I've lived in both help desk and cyber. It's the same continuum. Feels like my throat raw trying to get people to realize this. I think he had a little typo there, but you get the picture. And he said the reason why I went from help desk engineer to security engineer is because the same skill set applies if you're trying to build truly resilient system and nobody calls you with their problems because the issue never happened in the first place because you designed for it. So this is something that we also talked about in Microsoft's annual security report, because they talked about business resilience and your ability to survive an attack. And that's really what you want to aim for, is anticipating the fact that you're going to get attacked at some point, anticipating the fact that you may have some systems that will get compromised or maybe fall victim to ransomware, and then your ability to recover from that and move on as a business without even a hiccup, so to speak. So that is business resilience. That is cyber resilience. And so I guess my question would be to the listeners is, as you're thinking about this, what is your company's process today in recovering like a crashed hard drive? Are you able to recover that data? I'm thinking back to my days as a help desk support person, and we did it manually by trying to load the hard drive or fix the hard drive. You can do that with like SpinRite, one of the tools that has been out for a very, very long time. You can also have backup images like using a tool like Acronis. I think that was very popular back in the day. Some people still like do that and try to mirror a hard drive. There are still products out there, solutions that sell backup services to like a cloud storage that they host. But I think if you're doing that, it's kind of a waste of time and money when you have tools that have been out for over a decade, like OneDrive, formerly called SkyDrive, and you can do this seamlessly, like Swift on Security is saying here. And we'll talk about that, but I just want to think through the process of how I used to do it. And if you're still doing it that way, you're way behind the ball.
I believe it was last week, but it was within the last couple of weeks I went on a little bit of a rant about modern device management and how organizations have made leaps and bounds in so many different categories, and device management is still kind of a really old school practice at a lot of organizations. Still revolves around drop shipping devices twice, first to the corporate office and then to the field, and building images and a golden image and updating the image every time, the next Dell Latitude comes out or whatever their business laptop is called these days. And there's opportunities to modernize that in a lot of ways. And a lot of organizations, I think, have moved to OneDrive overall. I've heard a lot of companies say, like, we're moving away from mapped drives and home folders and moving those to OneDrive. I don't know if a lot of orgs have standardized a known folder move. And I don't know if they have a level of maturity to the point where essentially it's very difficult for a user to create, edit, or modify a file that's not on some sort of network or backed up or cloud storage. And that should be the case, right? It should be the case where really there's nothing unique about a user's individual device. Everything is synchronized to the cloud. Everything can be restored very, very quickly. That's not like a flying car at all. That is an achievable state. Just like we have with mobile devices, you can get 98% of the way that if a user's device, for whatever reason, is unusable, that you can recover from it quickly. And we'll talk about some of those technologies in a little more depth. But I think that's Swift on Security's point, is that's not necessarily considered like a cybersecurity thing, but it is, because it gives you that resiliency and recoverability in case of an attack, and has other benefits as well. You're going to use it way more often for hardware failure, but if the worst comes to pass, it is a nice option to have as well. And, from a Microsoft perspective, which again, I'd love to mention, Andy and I both work there. There's actually ransomware capabilities built into OneDrive, where you can say, like, yeah, all this user's files are encrypted, roll them all back. And you can do it kind of in one fell swoop. I'm a little fuzzy on the details, but I know it's a thing that exists. So definitely a tool that can help you get back to a usable state very, very quickly. So, we'll unpack that more as we go along, but the tweet just really spoke to me. I love anything where it's like, you don't need the new shiny tool, or you don't need to worry about a 0-day attack or all these really, pie in the sky things. Real excellence in cybersecurity, as we always say on this show, and probably a lot of other shows too, is getting some of these basics right. And this is one of them. It's not a basics thing, but it is an achievable state that I don't think requires you to like overhaul a lot of what you're doing. And we'll go through that as we go along. Known folder move in particular is huge because you don't have to retrain users. So, let's get into that now, Andy.
Yeah, I want to also mention another very common scenario that I used to encounter all the time. I think companies and help desk folks still encounter this, and I think it's gotten maybe a little tougher with the pandemic and people working from home. And that is when you offboard an employee, you usually have to disable their user account. Let's say, in this case, we're at a traditional company and they have on-prem Active Directory. So we disable that user within Active Directory. It syncs to the cloud and it disables their user in the cloud. Now, if we happen to get their laptop, now we need the data off it because they've left. And so the manager is asking for the data. Let's get the machine. Now we need to know what the password is. Okay, well, now you have to re-enable the user, reset the password, have it talk back to the server on-prem, network, all that stuff, right? And then you have to log into the machine, cache the password within Active Directory or within the OS of the system, so on and so forth. That is if you can get the computer to begin with, because now everyone's remote. And so I know a lot of companies, they never get the computer back. They just write it off as a business expense. So how do you solve for that, right? Well, we'll talk about it in a little bit, but one of the things is OneDrive has the capability of automatic access delegation. So if someone leaves and you disable the account, it automatically delegates access to the files within OneDrive to somebody, or to their manager. So you can designate someone to do that. You can have it automatically delegate to whoever, and then they have access to the files for a certain period of time. But that's a very common scenario. There's so many other uses. And Adam, you've mentioned multiple times now, there's something called known folder move. And this is something that actually I found out today after going through the documentation is available on both Windows and Mac. Mm-hmm. And that is a fairly new capability for Mac, but I was really happy to see that. And so what it does is it automatically, it used to be called like automatic redirection or known folder redirect or something like that, but now it's called just known folder move. And it takes these folders that are very common that users use all the time. On Windows, it's desktop, documents, pictures, screenshot, and camera roll. And on Mac, it is desktop and documents. And it redirects those folders to be in OneDrive. And so the user experience is they go to the icon in their Explorer or in the Finder, and when they click on that, it automatically opens up the folder that's named the same thing within the OneDrive directory. And that process can be absolutely seamless and transparent to the user. Now, you can configure it to prompt. You can configure it to have them okay it if they want to. But if it's a brand new machine, I would just enable it to be transparent. I think the recommendation is if you have files already within OneDrive, you might want to prompt them and let them know what's coming and have them, have communication crafted so that they know what the screens look like. But if it's brand new machines, new users, you can have group policy. Swift on security mentioned group policy. You can do this through Intune, of course, and have those configuration profiles not only sign in automatically with the user that's signed into Windows using the Windows credential to your OneDrive folder. So it's there, it's already configured. Then you can also have it silently just do the redirect with no prompts so that when the user opens up the Explorer, it's already done. They don't know the difference. And there's a lot of benefits in that. Like, number one, the users have no change in their habits that they're using from day to day. And then, of course, the files are then saved to the cloud with versioning, as Adam mentioned, so that if something happens, they can roll back to those different versions. For the Mac, you can obviously deploy OneDrive, either manually have the user install it, but they do have to be an admin. Of course, you can use software distribution methods like Intune or Jamf or any other software distributions you have for Mac and have them deploy the package. And then you can deploy what's called a plist, which is just a configuration, kind of like an XML file. Mm-hmm. And you can have that plist turn on certain flags. One of those flags is known folder move. Some of them are like open at login because the OneDrive client, unlike on Windows, doesn't just open on login. You have to actually set that as a flag. And then files on demand, which is another thing for both Windows and Mac. Great thing to have because it saves local space. It only downloads it when the file is requested. The majority of the files are just in the cloud until it's needed. So it saves local drive space. It used to be a kind of a big deal. Now drives are usually pretty big, but if you're using SSDs and they're smaller, and you have large files, you can have this file on demand get flagged. And one of the things that I saw in the documentation, which was really cool, was that OneDrive Sync for Mac OS runs natively on Apple Silicon, so it doesn't have to get translated through Rosetta in order to work. So there's no lag. It's just native on the new Apple Silicon.
So Andy walked you through kind of how you configure that and all the behind the scenes admin work. Let me tell you how it works in practice. I get a new Windows PC. I open it up. It's configured with autopilot. So it pops up and says, hey, you're a Microsoft employee. Sign in here. Username and password. Well, not even password, actually. Username. Next. Passwordless. Match the number, 64 or whatever. Pull out my phone. 64. Okay. Never put in my password. and it goes, oh, hey, Adam, we're going to set up Windows for you. Windows gets set up. I drop on my desktop. Guess what? All my icons are there from my previous PC on my desktop. So as far as I'm concerned as a user, wow, all my stuff's here automatically. I didn't have to do anything. That's awesome. No prompts, no signing into OneDrive independently, no configuring known folder move or any dialog boxes. They just show up. It's incredible. And yes, I know it's not like Microsoft invented that, like Apple does that with iCloud Drive as well on Mac OS. Like it's a thing that's been available, but from a business resiliency perspective, it's something that, as I keep saying, it's not a flying car. It's something every listener on this show, practically every listener, could enable, because all you really need is like an Office 365 E3 license to do that, which almost every organization has. I mean, that's very, very minimal. So very, very cool stuff. But in practice, again, like the end user experience is phenomenal. And you don't need autopilot and all that. I was giving like the best case scenario if you're doing autopilot, passwordless, all the things. But even if you're still, running an image and the user still goes to sign in, either way, their stuff's still going to be there on their desktop. As soon as the user signs into the OneDrive client, if they even get prompted separately, which doesn't need to happen, but it can be as seamless as sign in during the out-of-box experience and they're there.
And think about not only from a privacy, but also data security standpoint. If you have a machine that's onboarded with autopilot, the only way to really get rid of that machine from a user standpoint is to do a bare metal install of Windows. Because if they do a reset, let's say I'm a remote employee and I'm like, yeah, company said this device needs to be sent in. I'm going to keep it because I need a new computer. I'm going to go ahead and just hit reset from Windows, because that's easy to do for most users, is that they can maybe go to settings and reset it. It's going to go back to autopilot, and it's going to talk back to the cloud as soon as they connect to the internet, and they'll have to sign in with credentials, which have been disabled. So it really becomes useless unless they know how to do a bare metal install of Windows where you completely wipe it from scratch and install it from scratch with drivers and everything. Then the computer probably will just sit there and they won't be able to have access to any of the data that's previously on it. As well as if the data is sitting in OneDrive, they have to have credentials to sign in to access those files if they wanted to. But if it's like sitting on the desktop and you haven't configured known folder move, then those files are local and they can access them. So there's data privacy that's involved here, and also recovery. So once they're in OneDrive, if the user leaves, you have that automatic delegation. There's also versioning, like we mentioned. And so versioning, you actually get 500 different versions by default if you have versioning turned on. Now, the versioning setting is actually within SharePoint. SharePoint and OneDrive kind of share the same backend, so the settings for your organization are within SharePoint. And the default setting, if you have it turned on, is 500. I don't know why any organization would turn off versioning for SharePoint. It's a super powerful recovery tool, so have it turned on. You can lower the number of versions to 100, and you can make it as high as 50,000. But I think 500, unless it's like a very, very busy document, is probably enough for most people. And once something is deleted from OneDrive, there's 30 days to recover it by default, but you can also set it for longer. So that question comes up a lot where customers are like, okay, what if my computer gets hacked and I have all my files in OneDrive and they go and delete everything from my OneDrive? That's okay. You still have 30 days by default to recover it. And then let's say the 30 days pass, or they went into the recycling bin and hit delete. Well, there's a 93 day, I don't know why it's 93, but it's 93 days in the recycling bin, which will sit there after the 30 days, that you can still go back and restore. And even after that, you can still open up a support ticket with Microsoft to recover things that are outside of that date. Now, there is a point of no return at some point, and I can't remember the number of days, but after a certain time, after the recycling bin and it has been deleted, there is a point where Microsoft cannot recover it. But there is a grace period after those 93 days. It could be up to like another 90 days after that or something, like a total of 180 to some days. But just know that you have options. And if you haven't discovered it in 30 plus 93 plus whatever date that Microsoft can recover it at, then it's probably not that important, in my opinion. So, yeah. So, I mean, tons of different benefits, not only from a security, but also data privacy, and just like we're talking about this whole thing, business resilience, being able to recover from anything from a crashed hard drive to a cyber attack.
Yeah. And the whole point of this conversation wasn't really so much to talk up the praises of like OneDrive and known folder move. It's just more a specific example of how operational excellence protects you against cyber attacks and other bad things that can befall the organization. And that's where, you know, some of the same areas of conversation, like I talked about last week with some of the modern management things, like if your process to rebuild a PC is you need a golden image and it has to have line of sight to domain controllers and all of that, like how are you going to rebuild a PC in the field? If your answer is you can't, and the best you can do is hope you have one and image it really fast and then hope you're not too late to get it out for overnight delivery with UPS or FedEx, like that's not a very quick method. And that sure as heck doesn't scale if you have a massive event. And that's where things like modern management, autopilot, being able to take the standard Windows image and reuse it becomes really powerful, because you may not be able to re-image 500 machines in a day and ship them all out again, but you can reset Windows PCs back to default if it's anything with Windows Pro, have a user sign in and download all the apps and settings they need over the network, over the internet. Well, that's a different ballgame, right? So again, like getting really sharp and operationally excellent in the entire end-to-end life cycle of an end user PC is really beneficial. Or even having options for cloud PCs, possibly as well, and being able to spin those up quickly and having that capability ready to go. The time you discover you need that, and if you don't have it already prepared and you haven't already done the work, you're too late. So I've told organizations for a while now, at least having like a small Windows 365 or equivalent, you know, use whatever, or Azure Virtual Desktop or what is it, AWS Workspaces, whatever it's called, like having one of those kind of ready to go, an environment that's ready made and that you've already done all the plumbing is another example of resilience, where if the worst were to happen and you need to get a whole bunch of users online really quickly because all their client PCs went kaput, it would be really nice if it's as simple as go buy, or not even buy, go put in a whole bunch of reservations for Windows 365 licenses. Now you've got 1,000 and spin up 1,000 cloud PCs. Snap at your fingers and you're good to go. But if you haven't looked at that and then you need to do it, well, you're too late. You know, so these are the kind of things, like as cybersecurity professionals, we might say, well, that's not my job, or, you know, that's another department. But that's where that cross-department collaboration helps you achieve your goals too. And so encouraging the organization, we need a cloud PC strategy. We need a modern Windows management practice. We need a modern Mac management practice. And being able to spin up all those things at a moment's notice is really, really powerful. So this goes beyond OneDrive. It's just a really specific example where, again, if you can't recover from an SSD failure in a hurry, well, then you're in a world of hurt if something worse happens. That's the whole point. That's the thesis of tonight's discussion. But think of ways where you can expand upon that and where it becomes valuable in other ways and other areas you can apply it to.
There are so many examples. I'm just thinking as you're talking, Adam, another thing that would have been helpful back in the day when I was at the help desk was we had a global company And to ship PCs to some countries, they have to go through customs. And that's a costly and timely thing. And sometimes in some countries, those machines just kind of disappear when they go through customs. I mean, it happens. Mm-hmm. And so it's a pain. Even with Canada, we used to when we had to have our sales reps in Canada get new PCs, we would literally pay a manager to hand carry 4 or 5 PCs and fly him out to Canada to hand deliver these PCs to the sales reps in the field. We had one ransomware attack or cyber attack of some sort in Brazil, and the PC was down and they needed a PC. And the manager just went to wherever and picked up some PC. And back then we didn't have anything like conditional access set up. He was just accessing company data on a personal PC that he went and bought for company use. But today we have all these things where you can direct the user to Azure AD Join It from the out-of-box experience. You can even do that within Windows, even if they've signed in already. Mm-hmm. You can Azure AD Join It from, joining it to the company, or you can have conditional access to join it as, workplace join or whatever it's called these days. But it's essentially, if you have Intune and conditional access set up, you can set it up like a personal PC, but then have it all deliver the same things. So all that can be done very seamlessly. Layer on all your policies without having to have that golden image that you're talking about. And it's, again, security as well as operational excellence and just getting the business where it needs to go, enabling the business, which we talk about quite a bit, without hampering it and, having archaic different ways. Like I'm thinking about, well, if I needed to Active Directory join a machine, well, I have to somehow allow that user to get a VPN client, probably sign in with the VPN client, then have to do a domain join, which you need, maybe you have that locked down, which most companies do. So you probably have to have an admin, domain join it, all this stuff, right? When you can just Azure AD Join It from the field, have internet connection, you can install your, AV, EDR solution, any other proxies you might want, and just have those push down automatically, configure, single sign-on, boom, and you're good to go. So think about other ways that you can apply what we're kind of talking about.
Mm-hmm. Great points. And, one thing that jumped in my head that I think a lot of people don't even know is really cool, by the way. If you, and this isn't limited to this scenario, but it's the most common one. If you Azure AD join a device, like in the out-of-box experience, and let's say, so it has to at least be Windows Pro for that to even be an option. So if it's Windows 10 Home or Windows 11 Home, that won't even show up. But if you can go buy, a PC from a Best Buy or an Office Max and just say, I need one that you have, and they'll have some that have Pro on them, you can Azure AD join it, and then guess what? That can automatically step itself up to Enterprise. You don't have to re-image it to put Enterprise on it. That's actually, it's possible to do that just in time. If the user's licensed for Windows Enterprise, it'll step them up. Again, you could literally enable, in the case of a worst case scenario where all your user devices get hosed, you could say, just go buy a device with Windows 11 Pro and Azure AD join it, and we can get you operational again. Again, that's powerful. Or if you can spin up a cloud PC and say, use any device you got, iPad, Android phone, whatever, we can at least get you connected. That's a great option too. So it's bigger than OneDrive, right? It's a great example of how cybersecurity can make a play that benefits you, but also benefits the company at large.
I apply this to my daily life too. All of my personal devices, for the most part, I can't think of a single one where if I were to lose that device, if the hard drive were to crash, or if even my phone, which is your phone is your lifeline for the most part. It has all my MFA keys on it. Even if I were to lose that, it has a snapshot of iCloud backup, which is now encrypted end to end, from every morning, and then it has I use the Microsoft Authenticator for my main keys that aren't in 1Password. That has on the iOS version is able to sync to an iCloud account as backup. On Android, it works a little different. You have to sync it to an email address. So, you have to think about how you would recover that key from backup. But the Microsoft Authenticator is where I have those keys. If I were to lose my phone, I can restore it from an iCloud backup. Even with MFA on other Apple devices, it'll prompt to make sure that I am who I say I am, get my Authenticator keys back, and I'm good to go. Mm-hmm. And the rest of my keys are in 1Password, which I have to authenticate. But I also do have a physical MFA token, a FIDO2 key for my 1Password. So I would be good either way for the most part, right? And so think about your personal life and how you would recover. Like my Windows PC, for the most part, anything that I need backed up or recovered, I usually keep in OneDrive. Like one example is I play a lot of MMOs, massive online games, or massive multiplayer online games. And some of your settings are custom. And so every time you get into a new instance of the game, not all of them are backed up to the cloud. A lot of them are still backed up locally to your program files folder. Every so often, I will just drag a copy of those settings and just dump them into my OneDrive. And I do my own versioning, right? So like every couple of months, I'll just rename the previous folder, whatever date, 01/20/2023, right? So it's a good tool to get used to. All my stuff is already automatically redirected. I think you have to do that manually on your own PC, but it's worth doing and walking through. So if you have a Windows PC at home and you are an Office 365 customer, then try it out on your own PC and see how that experience works if you're worried about how it might work in an enterprise.
Good call. Absolutely. Known folder move is a thing for personal OneDrive accounts as well. So I have a couple of Windows PCs, my Surface Studio, my Surface laptop, that are signed in with my Microsoft account, my consumer account, and they get the same like desktop files and synced across all of them as well. And I think that's a really good point. And Andy, you actually didn't say your line exactly how it's written in the show notes. Andy wrote, "I can take any of my devices today and throw them in a lake while not losing any data." And I laughed, but it's so true. And I feel the same way, right? Like it would be a hassle if I lost my iPhone, but I'm not going to lose anything. All my photos are automatically uploaded to iCloud Photo Library. It's backed up to iCloud nightly. I have messages in the cloud turned on, so all my messages are going to be synchronized. And the way the
contacts.
The way the Apple ecosystem works is, you can get that MFA prompt in any of your other devices. So I've got, oodles of Apple devices. One of them can get an MFA prompt. I can get into my Apple ID, and then I can recover my Microsoft Authenticator, which has my backup for my 1Password, and same kind of process Andy walked through. Like I've got it all mapped out that even if this gets compromised, I've got this way to do it, and even if that gets compromised, I can do this. And thinking about that is a good thought process as well. And you should be resilient in your personal life at this point for the same reasons, cyber attacks or just hardware failure. It pains me. And Andy, you wrote this as well. You used to work at Best Buy. I worked at the Apple Store, and I think both of us had experiences where people came in with data loss, and it's heartbreaking. And it was different, 10, 15 years ago when backup options weren't as good and they weren't as automated, and there wasn't really the cloud in the same way there is today. But like today, data loss doesn't need to happen. It just doesn't for anyone, even non-technical folks. Like we can put enough guardrails around them that they will be okay. And so data loss breaks my heart, but it almost makes me today like I'm less empathetic, and there's a little more of like, what were you doing? Like When people are like, I lost all my phone numbers. I'm like, what do you mean you don't have your contacts back up? I lost my pictures. Like, what do you mean you don't have your pictures backed up? Like, I don't understand. Like, you know, I mean, I think for some people, like, they don't want to pay. But it's like, gosh, you know, your photos are priceless. Like, whatever Apple wants, and Apple charges too much for iCloud storage, absolutely. But still, your photos are priceless. It's worth it. I mean, at the end of the day, they know they've got you, you know, captive. And if you don't want to use them, you could use Google Photos. Although, you know, the iOS integration is just not quite as good, but you can get by. Yeah. Heck, and Google OneDrive will automatically back up your camera roll on iOS.
It will. Yep. And Google does the same thing that you're talking about with the MFA on like Apple devices. Google does that same experience within YouTube. So if you've ever signed in with your Google account, you'll actually notice that they'll say, hey, please authorize yourself in this app that you have signed in with your Google account. And most likely, if you have a Google account, you're probably signed in on multiple things. You may be using Chrome, which already has, you know, as soon as you sign into Gmail and Chrome, it signs you into the Chrome browser and all your things are single sign on. If you have a Google account, you probably have it signed into your YouTube. So, I mean, it knows everything you're signed in on. It'll just prompt you, say, open up this browser that you're signed in and authorize yourself. So again, pretty easy to recover. Make sure that you have those backups turned on in your personal life as well. Anything else we want to talk about tonight, Adam?
I think that about does it on this subject, you know, and I'd be curious to hear from our listeners other ways you think of operational excellence that can be a defensive mechanism for cybersecurity defenders and things we didn't even bring up or talk about. We focused really on the endpoint, I think, in this show and building excellence around the endpoint. And that's kind of been a theme for me this year, apparently. But I'm sure there's other examples we're not thinking of since we're kind of on that tangent this evening. But I think it's a good conversation. And what I love about Swift on Security, although they get on weird tangents sometimes and tweet really odd things sometimes, is they have a really sound and solid understanding of information security's role in the broader organization. They definitely don't have this siloed perspective of just cybersecurity. They see it as, and it's again because of their background that they came from help desk, and I came from help desk, and Andy, I know you did too. That perspective carries through, because if there's one thing you learn on the help desk, you learn all the rough edges. You learn all of the areas of your organization that really could use some smoothing over. And I guess as a final parting thought, you know, maybe that's a great opportunity for cybersecurity folks to spend some time shadowing or sitting in on the help desk and learning what are the common pitfalls that run into all the time. Because if you can solve for those, you know, you're a hero from an operational perspective of you're making the company more money because you're making them more efficient. But you probably have also solved a pain point that would become a really big pain point in the middle of some sort of attack. And so that's an easy way to kind of do almost like internal pen testing and discover your weaknesses, is just go sit with the help desk. You'll figure out what stuff doesn't work very well. So I don't know. That's kind of an interesting thought. And again, Swift on Security, they always do a good job of making me think about different things. Strongly recommend following them if you don't already.
Yeah, a lot of people ask me about how to get into cybersecurity and all that, and how there aren't many open positions. I loved working at the help desk. And even though it wasn't like a security position, it got me into IT. It taught me about troubleshooting. It taught me about finding ways to make things work, getting the job done. But it also taught me about how users think. It's a very good people learning position where you can, you know, just see how people work, what their complaints are. When you start implementing different policies, you'll have more empathy because you understand that you're not only going to be impacting people, but you're also going to be impacting support tickets. So the people that you were just in, it's kind of like if you were ever a server in a restaurant, like you're not going to treat the servers when you go out poorly because you were in their positions previously and you understand how they feel. So I love coming from the help desk, coming from infrastructure engineer perspective. I think all of those skill sets bring a lot to cybersecurity. So, kudos to them. And, if you ever are in those positions and you're thinking about getting into security, don't hesitate because your skill sets will definitely transfer over.
Did you do any time like as like end user computing team?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. That was actually the brunt of my IT experience before I joined Microsoft was on various they go by different names: personal productivity, end user computing, end user technology. That's where I did the majority of my IT career, was in that field. And so when you think about engineering the user experience a lot, that's a really helpful perspective to carry with you. And I was, as a relatively young IT professional at the time in my mid-20s, pretty vocal about some stuff of saying like, this is wrong. We shouldn't do it this way. This is shitty experience or whatever. I definitely, it was interesting that in Iowa, in financial services, which is a conservative kind of industry, a lot of the feedback was you need to mind your time more. You need to get more experience before you can have such a strong point of view or a strong perspective, or be so passionate about it. And then the funny thing was, this is a total side note, but we're just kind of having a conversation tonight. I got to Microsoft, and one of the first things they told me is you should have a perspective. You should have a point of view. You should be passionate about what you do. And so some of I almost had to unlearn behaviors that were taught to me, because at some of these organizations I was at, you had to deliver bad news in like such a couched manner. You had to like apologize for this and apologize for that. I mean, I got my hand slapped a couple of times for just telling like an executive assistant that that's the way it works. Like that's how it's supposed to work, that the sky is blue and the grass is green. And it's like, no, you need to apologize for the grass being green and the sky being blue. I'm like, what are you talking about? And the point of my story is that if sometimes you feel like parts of your personality or skills or traits of yours aren't valued in your current role, there may be roles where they're more valued and there is more of an appetite for them, because things in my IT career that didn't serve me well served me really well in my career at Microsoft. And so that's just an interesting, like, complete side note perspective as we're talking through broadening your horizons and thinking of things from different perspective. If you ever feel that way, there's probably a position that maybe is a better fit for you, on a, again, total side note.
Well, this was a fun conversation tonight. We don't always get to kind of riff back and forth like this on our opinions, but hopefully you learned something. And, if you have questions or comments on the show, definitely email us, tweet us. I'm on Mastodon, LinkedIn. All that information will be in the show notes. So reach out if you have questions or comments.
I'm going to have to get on Mastodon now. Twitter finally ticked me off enough that I think I'm done, because they killed third-party clients, man. And that one was just, and the way they did it just, made me so mad. I was a dedicated Tweetbot user forever and ever. And I would have been fine if they put ads in Tweetbot and served ads there. Fine. I mean, if that's the price I have to pay to keep it, whatever. But just unceremoniously killing all the third-party clients, and the first-party client is so bad. It's just been like, that's finally been the like nail in the coffin for me to be like, okay, I think I'm done here. Which I won't be, because I'm like a degenerate, but it was just like, I was so mad about the discontinuation of third-party clients and the way it went down. It didn't have to be. Like, it's within Twitter's right to say, hey, we don't want third-party clients anymore. I mean, Facebook doesn't have third-party clients. and whatever. I mean, that's their right. But like, you don't have to kill it in the middle of the night, not offer an explanation for a week, lie and say that's been against the policy for a long time, which then they changed the policy after they said that, and not give these developers a chance to wind down operations and tell their users, like, users just got a wonky error and just stuff broke, like randomly. Like, I got some error tweet bot about like my token being invalid, and then I tried to sign back in and it didn't work, and had to go hunt for why does Tweetbot not work? Well, none of the third-party clients work anymore, but like Twitterific on the Mac. And it's so stupid. It doesn't have to be that way. Anyhow, I'm on a roll. Let's close the show here.
All right. Well, after that, that's our show for this week. Thanks for listening and watching. As always, our contact information will be in the show notes. We'll talk to you guys next week.
Thank you for listening to the Blue Security Podcast. Please check out the show notes, catch up on episodes you may have missed, and subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. Find Andy on Twitter @AJaw0 and Adam @AJ Brewer. See you at our next episode.